July 4th, 1187. The strongest Crusader army ever assembled was about to be completely wiped out in the burning desert near the Sea of Galilee. By sunset, the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem lay in ruins. But how did one terrible battle destroy centuries of conquest and change the course of history forever? On July 4th, 1187, in the burning hot desert near the Sea of Galilee, the strongest Crusader army ever put together was about to be completely wiped out. By the time the sun set, the Christian kingdom of Jerusalem would be in ruins, and the Crusades would never be the same again. This is the story of how one terrible battle changed history forever. The year 1187 started with the Crusader states looking like they had total control over the Holy Land. For almost 100 years, Christian knights had built kingdoms that stretched from Antioch in the north all the way down to the deserts of Jordan in the south. Jerusalem, the most important city to Christians, stood as a sign of European power right in the middle of the Muslim world. But underneath all this strength, cracks were already forming that would soon destroy everything the Crusaders had built. At the center of this coming storm was a Kurdish warrior named Yusuf ibn Ayyub. History knows him better as Saladin. Unlike the divided Muslim rulers who came before him, Saladin had something far more dangerous than just fighting. Skills. He had a vision. Ever since he became the leader of Egypt in 1169, he had slowly brought the Muslim world together under his command. He used smart politics, religious passion, and careful warfare to do this. The change was amazing. In 1174, Saladin took over Damascus. By 1183, Aleppo had fallen to his forces. City by city, deal by deal, he was building something the Crusaders had never faced before. A united Muslim group that stretched from Egypt all the way to Mesopotamia. For the first time in decades, the Christians found themselves surrounded. But now it wasn't by fighting small kingdoms. Instead, they faced one determined enemy with the resources of many kingdoms at his command. What made Saladin truly scary was how he could turn this fight into a religious war. He convinced his people that this wasn't just another fight over land. This was a holy war to take back Jerusalem from foreign invaders. Under the banner of Sunni Islam, warriors from all across the Middle East came to join his cause. The Crusaders had always benefited when Muslims fought each other. Now they faced an enemy united by faith and purpose. But while Saladin was building his alliance, the Crusader leaders were destroying themselves from the inside. The kingdom of Jerusalem had become like a powder keg of competing ambitions and personal hatred. At the heart of these divisions stood three men whose hate for each other would prove more destructive than any enemy army. King Guy of Lusignan had recently claimed the throne by marrying Queen Sibylla, but many people constantly questioned whether he was the real king. Many nobles thought he was weak and couldn't make decisions. They saw him as a puppet of his wife's ambitions, rather than a true leader. His authority was challenged at every turn by powerful barons who believed they had better claims to power. The main rival was Raymond III of Tripoli, one of the most experienced military commanders in the Crusader states. Raymond had the political smarts and battlefield experience that Guy lacked. But he also held deep anger toward the new king. Their relationship had gotten so bad that Raymond was openly talking with Saladin. He actually preferred the Muslim leader to his own supposed king. Then there was REYNALD of Chatillon, perhaps the most reckless and dangerous of the three. He was the master of the fortress of Kerak. REYNALD was like a throwback to an earlier, more brutal time of the Crusades. Where others looked for peaceful solutions, he preferred the sword. Where others honored truces, he saw only chances for personal gain. His actions would soon give Saladin exactly the excuse he needed to launch his final campaign. The spark that started this conflict came in early 1187, when Reynald did something that would doom the entire kingdom. Even though there was a truce between Saladin and the Crusader states, Reynald attacked a Muslim merchant caravan traveling the pilgrimage route to Mecca. This wasn't just robbery. It was a deliberate act meant to start trouble that broke the most sacred rules of medieval warfare. The caravan was carrying pilgrims on their way to perform the Hajj, one of the 5 most important duties of Islam. By attacking it, Reynald had not only broken the truce but had struck at the very heart of Muslim religious practice. When word reached Saladin, he reportedly declared that he would personally execute Reynald for this betrayal. The die was cast. Saladin's response was swift and smart. Rather than attacking Reynald's fortress right away, he came up with a plan that would draw the entire Crusader army into a trap. On July 2, 1187, his forces attacked the city of Tiberias, a strategically important but lightly defended town near the Sea of Galilee. The attack on Tiberias was brilliant in its simplicity. The city was ruled by Raymond of Tripoli, but his wife Eshiva was trapped inside with only a small group of soldiers. When news of the attack reached the Crusader leadership, they faced an impossible choice. They could stay safely in their fortified positions at Sepphoris, or they could march to save Tiberias and risk everything in open battle. King Guy found himself caught between conflicting advice. Raymond of Tripoli, even though his own wife was in danger, advised patience. He argued that Tiberias could be rebuilt, but if they lost the field army, the entire kingdom would fall. It was good military thinking, but it ignored the political realities Guy faced. The king had already been criticized as weak and unable to make decisions. If he allowed Raymond's wife to fall into enemy hands without trying to rescue her, his already weak authority would collapse completely. The warrior nobles of the kingdom expected their king to fight, not to calculate odds like a merchant counting coins. Gerard de Riedefort, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, pushed for immediate action. The military orders had their own reasons for wanting battle. They had been created to fight the enemies of Christ, and a defensive strategy offered little chance for glory or treasure. Their voices carried enormous weight in a kingdom where religious and military authority were the same thing. Under this pressure, Guy made the deadly decision to march. On July 3, 1187, the largest Crusader army ever assembled began its advance toward Tiberias. It was a force that represented the complete military might of the Christian kingdom. Nearly every able-bodied knight from Jerusalem to Antioch had been called to fight. Additional mercenaries had been hired using the yearly tribute sent by King Henry II of England for the defense of the Holy Land. The numbers were impressive. Over 16,000 men, including around 1,300 mounted knights and 15,000 foot soldiers. It was a massive army by medieval standards, larger than many that had conquered entire kingdoms. But it was also the kingdom's final gamble. In putting together this force, the Crusaders had stripped their castles and cities of their guards. If this army was destroyed, there would be nothing left to defend the realm. As the great army began its march across the rocky terrain of Galilee, few could have imagined they were walking into the most carefully prepared trap in medieval military history. Saladin had spent months positioning his forces, controlling water sources, and studying the routes the Crusaders would be forced to take. Every step of their advance had been expected and planned for. The march quickly turned into a nightmare of heat, thirst, and constant attacks. The July sun beat down mercilessly on knights wearing heavy mail and plate armor. The rocky ground made it hard to keep formation while Muslim light cavalry struck at the sides and rear, shooting clouds of arrows before disappearing into the hills. By nightfall on July 3rd, the situation had become desperate. The Crusader army found itself trapped on a barren plateau between 2 rocky hills known as the Horns of Hattin. Below them lay the Sea of Galilee, its waters temptingly close yet completely unreachable. Saladin's forces had positioned themselves between the Christians and every possible water source, creating a siege without walls. The Muslim commander had planned this moment with surgical precision. His troops were well supplied, regularly rotated, and fighting on familiar ground. Meanwhile, the flower of Christian knighthood sat parched and exhausted, their horses dying beneath them, their armor becoming furnaces in the desert heat. It was psychological warfare at its most brutal, and it was working perfectly. As dawn broke on July 4th, 1187, Saladin ordered his men to set fire to the dry grass surrounding the Christian camp. Thick, choking smoke billowed across the plateau, blinding the already demoralized Crusaders and adding suffocating heat to their misery. The symbolism was unmistakable. This was not merely a battle. It was a purification by fire. What followed was less a military fight than a systematic destruction. Saladin's mounted archers, supplied with 400 loads of fresh arrows brought up during the night, unleashed volley after volley into the packed Christian ranks. The Crusaders, trained for close combat, found themselves helpless against this rain of death from a distance. Count Raymond of Tripoli, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation, attempted 2 desperate cavalry charges to break through to the waters of Lake Tiberias. Both failed catastrophically. In a final act of self-preservation, Raymond and his remaining knights abandoned the field entirely, leaving King Guy's forces completely isolated. The collapse was swift and total. The Christian infantry, driven mad by thirst and terror, broke ranks and fled en masse to the rocky outcrops of the horns themselves. There they huddled like sheep, taking no further part in the battle, while their noble commanders faced annihilation below. King Guy, mounted on his destrier and surrounded by his household knights, made 3 final desperate charges at Saladin's position. Each assault was beaten back with devastating losses. The cream of Christian nobility fell in those moments, their heavy cavalry tactics useless against the mobile warfare of their enemies. When the last charge faltered, the battle was over. Of the 16,000 men who had marched from Sepphoris, barely 100 knights escaped with their lives. The rest lay dead on the field or knelt in chains before their captors. Among the prizes taken was a fragment of the true cross, carried into battle by the Bishop of Acre, and now lost forever to Christendom. Saladin's treatment of the prisoners revealed both his political wisdom and his personal vendettas. King Guy and most of the Christian lords were spared, too valuable as hostages and too useful for future negotiations. But when Reynald of Chatillon was brought before him, Saladin personally drew his sword and struck off the head of the man who had broken the sacred truce. It was justice, medieval style, swift and final. The military orders fared far worse. Nearly every captured Templar and Hospitaller was executed on Saladin's orders. These warrior monks, sworn to perpetual war against Islam, represented everything he sought to eliminate from the Holy Land. Only Gerard de Riedefort, Grand Master of the Templars, was spared, perhaps kept alive as a symbol of Christian defeat. The true catastrophe of Hattin became clear in the days that followed. With the field army destroyed and the kingdom's castles stripped of their garrisons, there was nothing left to resist Saladin's advance. City after city fell like dominoes. Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, Sidon, Beirut, Ascalon, each surrender brought Saladin closer to his ultimate prize. On October 2nd, 1187, barely 3 months after Hattin, the gates of Jerusalem opened to Muslim forces. The city that had been the heart of the Crusader enterprise for 88 years was lost in a single campaign. Saladin's generous treatment of the Christian population, allowing those who could pay ransom to leave safely, only highlighted the completeness of his victory. The psychological impact on Christian Europe was devastating. When news of the disaster reached Rome, Pope Urban III reportedly died of shock upon hearing the report. The Third Crusade that followed, despite being led by 3 of Europe's most powerful monarchs, could only partially restore Christian fortunes in the East. Richard the Lionheart's brilliant tactical victories at Arsuf and elsewhere proved that individual battles could still be won. The Treaty of Jaffa in 1192 secured a coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa for the Christians. But Jerusalem itself remained in Muslim hands, and the truncated kingdom that emerged from the Third Crusade was a pale shadow of its former glory. the fundamental balance of power had shifted permanently at Hattin. Never again would the Crusaders possess the overwhelming military superiority they had enjoyed in the early decades of their presence. The Muslim world had learned the lessons of unity under Saladin's leadership, and future conflicts would be fought on far more equal terms. The final collapse came in 1244 at the Battle of La Forbi, where the last great Crusader army in the east was destroyed by Mamluk forces. But that defeat was merely the final chapter in a story that had begun at Hattin 57 years earlier. The Battle of Hattin stands as one of history's most decisive engagements, a single day that changed the path of civilizations. It showed how quickly centuries of conquest could be undone by strategic brilliance, political division, and the brutal realities of medieval warfare. The Crusaders never recovered because they never again faced their enemies as a unified force, while their opponents had learned the power of working together and having purpose. In the scorching heat of a July morning in 1187, more than an army died on the horns of Hattin. An entire world order perished, and with it the dream of a permanent Christian presence in the heart of the Islamic world.